Welcome to the Steps in Purpose podcast with Edie Ann. This podcast explores emotional awareness, faith, and purposeful living through short, reflective conversations designed to help you notice where you are and take your next step with clarity. Thanks for being here. Have you ever found yourself sitting in a train of thought that keeps bringing you back to the same questions over and over and over again? Like, why me? Why was I dealt this hand? Why do I keep screwing up? Why does it seem like the hard things keep finding me? And why does life feel heavier for me than it does for everyone else? That kind of thinking can feel so personal and so real when you're in it. And today I want to sit in that space with grace, because this is a place more people visit than they may ever say out loud. I literally just visited this space earlier this week. As we keep walking through the emotion gauge, this episode brings us deeper into the level of victim. This is where pain begins to shape the story we tell ourselves about our lives. It's where disappointment becomes personal, right? It's where struggle starts to feel familiar, and it's where the mind quietly settles into a posture of watching life happen through the lens of hurt. This is the place where the heart says, of course this happened to me. This is the place where the soul feels bruised enough to believe life has signaled it out for hardship. Sometimes people hear the phrase self-pity and immediately picture someone being dramatic or attention-seeking. Yet, most of the time, it doesn't look anything like that. Most of the time, it looks like a tired person sitting with a tired heart and a tired mind, replaying the weight of their life in a way that feels heavy and lonely. It can look like silence. It can look like withdrawal. It can look like feeling overlooked and carrying a private sadness that sounds a lot like Eeyore walking through the day under a gray cloud. I talk about Eeyore syndrome. That Eeyore syndrome of thought has a certain sound to it. It sounds like, here we go again. It sounds like, things always fall apart for me. It sounds like, everyone else seems to catch a break, but I keep catching the hard part. It sounds like, I always get the painful version, the disappointing version, the unfair version. And you know what? When those thoughts start looping, they begin to color everything. A hard moment starts to feel like proof of a hard life. A disappointment starts to feel like a pattern, and a setback starts to feel like a personal identity. This is what makes self-pity such a tender thing to talk about. Underneath it, there is usually some real pain. There's usually grief that has stayed too long without being soothed. There's usually disappointment that's stacked up over time. And there's usually a heart that has felt unseen, unsupported, passed over, or exhausted by carrying too much for too long. And when someone slips into self-pity, it's often because something inside them is aching, and that ache has been trying to find language. That is why I want to approach this with compassion instead of judgment. I can understand how a person gets here. Trust me. When life has hit the same wound enough times, the mind starts preparing for some of the same. Right? When pain has repeated itself in different forms, the heart starts expecting hardship. And when someone has carried sorrow for long enough, it can begin to feel normal to read life through that sorrow. The thoughts may sound gloomy, yet beneath them, there's often a deep longing to be comforted, understood, and maybe held with a little bit of care. Self-pity also has a way of becoming strangely familiar. It can feel like an emotional home you kept returning to because it matches the ache you already know. It gives a person language for their hurt. It gives shape to their sadness. It says, this mattered. This was hard, and this left a mark. In that way, it can almost feel validating to sit there for a while, right? It can feel like the only place where the heart is finally telling the truth about how heavy life has felt. It's validating. The hard part is that the more we sit in that atmosphere, the more it begins to influence what we notice. Right? We start collecting evidence for the story already playing in our minds. We notice every inconvenience, every letdown, every silence, every hard turn, and each one seems to whisper the same message. See, life really is hard for you. See, things really do go wrong for you. See, this really is your story. That emotional pattern can become so familiar that it starts to feel true in every direction you look. You've heard like attracts like? That's what's happening. And you're starting to believe the story that you're telling. That is why someone in self-pity can feel so deeply stuck. Their thoughts are feeding the pain, and the pain is feeding the thoughts, and around it goes, right? The mind keeps circling back to the same old questions. Why me? Why does this happen? Why is it always me? Why did I get this life? Why does it feel like I keep drawing the short straw? Those questions carry real emotion. And they also carry a kind of heaviness that can settle into the body, the mood, the relationships, and the way a person moves through life. When you're in this place, everything can start to feel personal. A delay feels pointed. A disappointment feels loaded. Someone else's ease feels like a reminder of your own struggle. Life can begin to feel unfair in a way that reaches far beyond the moment that you're in. Even the small things can feel like part of a larger pattern. And before long, the whole story of your life starts sounding like one long list of proof that you were dealt a harder hand. And if you're being honest, there are seasons when that thought pattern feels justified. There are seasons when people truly have been carrying too much. There are seasons when life has felt relentless. One where loss follows another, where grief piles up and exhaustion rests in your lap, where hurt keeps pressing on and pressing on. In moments like that, self-pity can feel almost understandable because the heart is trying to make sense of pain that feels larger than words. That's why this conversation matters. I want you to feel seen here. I want you to know that when you catch yourselves thinking in this way, it doesn't mean that you're weak. It means something inside is hurting. It means that there's a part of you feeling weary and overlooked. It means that it's likely a sadness underneath the thought pattern that's been asking for some compassion. So much of what we call self-pity is actually pain that has been going without tenderness, right? Without grace. And sometimes what sounds like complaining is just heartbreak. Sometimes what sounds like poor me is really a soul saying life has felt so very hard for so very long. And sometimes what sounds like gloom is really disappointment that never found a safe place to land. And when we understand that, we can begin to look at what this level has with some softer eyes. We can begin to recognize that this pattern came from somewhere, right? It grew in real experiences with real wounds, with real letdowns and real moments that left a mark. That is part of what makes the victim level super tender. There is sorrow here. There is heaviness here. There's a sense of life happening to you instead of with you. There's a feeling of carrying a story that sounds painful every time you tell it. There's a part of the soul that wants to stop bracing for the next blow and simply be held in the truth that this has felt like a lot. So, if this episode feels close to home for you, I hope it brings a little recognition to whatever has been weighing on your heart. Perhaps you have been sitting in that Eeyore kind of thought life lately, right? Where your mind keeps drifting back to what is unfair, what's missing, what's painful, and what seems harder for you than it is for someone else. And perhaps you've been rehearsing the same inner story without even realizing how often it's running, right? And perhaps you've simply gotten so tired, and the tiredness has started shaping the way you see everything. And today, that is all we're doing. We're letting it be real. We're allowing you to feel heard. We're giving language to the heaviness without rushing past it. We are simply noticing the tone of that inner voice and the atmosphere that it's creating. And for some people, this episode may feel like looking in a mirror. For others, it may feel like finally having words for a state that they've lived in for years, right? And either way, I want this to land with grace. You are human if you felt this. You're human if your heart has sagged under the weight of your own story. And you are human if your thoughts have taken on that gloomy, weary, poor me tone from time to time. I have. This is deep compassion available for that place. So, if this is where you are today, let this simply be a moment of recognition. Let it be a moment where your heart feels less without pressure. Let it be seen. Let it be a moment where you realize that underneath self-pity, there may be hurt, grief, loneliness, disappointment, exhaustion, and a longing to be comforted. Let it be enough to notice the pattern and hear the ache beneath it. Thank you for sitting with me in this conversation today. Thank you for being willing to let a tender subject be tender. If you'd like to visit this further, get more tools, more resources, visit edieanne.com at edieanne.com. Thanks for spending this time with me. Until next time, keep stepping in purpose.